It's Shirley,
It's Esther,
and this is the Move with Power podcast.
I grew up in North Carolina, and was raised by West African immigrants. My dad's Nigerian and my mom's Liberian. And so, they raised me very proudly, African and also Black American. So I was very lucky to like grow up on an HBCU campus. And, growing up in the South, and growing up first generation American, I definitely was taught from an early age, you know, what does it mean to like respect the environment and to be thankful for our natural resources, but also to be thankful for each other and really how this life and like the ability to like have the privilege to wake up every day and go to work and go to school cannot be taken for granted, but also people who are like me, who come from my background, we deserve more. Like we deserve to be able to have greater agency and greater resources. And so I definitely grew up in, you know, a movement household, I would say. My parents would not see themselves as like movement workers or activists. But I think that's because like their work in a professional capacity was always so personal, being that my dad is a political scientist and cultural anthropologist, and my mom's a nurse. And so in any case, like I think like social impact has always been a part of like my life story, whether through school or, now as a professional and like a business owner. But I also just think on like a personal level in the ways in which like my parents raised me to understand that, I have to be someone of integrity and someone who has like a strong like sense of like purpose and values. After growing up in North Carolina, I went to school in Chicago, where I studied business, and I also minored in community development. And I also majored in German language studies.
Oh,
But
wow.
during my time, yeah,
That's a
I was
lot.
busy. I was busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as I went into college, a big reason why I was busy is because, I was raised by people and folks who were really committed and passionate about their work. And so that's kind of just like, how I went into the world, which there's something to
Yeah.
say about that as like a child of immigrants.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely
but
can relate there. Yeah.
right, like y'all might know, but it's very easy, I think, when you're a child of immigrants, and especially if you're like a girl child, me now, like a woman, to feel a lot of like responsibility. And I think I felt that at a really young age going into college. But in any capacity, I stayed busy. And during college, I spent a lot of time working in the community, volunteering, being really, really deeply involved in sort of like what it means to be like a citizen and what it means to like understand what's happening around you and what role you play in it. I think college, took what I was raised by and just like amplified it, especially being in a city like Chicago. And that's also where I learned where I have a responsibility to any community that I am a part of or join, especially if I'm a visitor, especially if I'm not a native. But with that being said, when going into college, I actually wanted to go to art school, but I could not afford art school. Art school just wasn't an option. Again, being, from an immigrant background, not coming from like wealth. And so I kind of made a commitment to myself at the age of 17 that, okay, I can't go to art school, but what I can do is learn how to, build a business
Mhm.
and, seek something that does provide me stability, but also will allow me to pursue a creative life. That if I
Mhm.
can seek stability, then in whatever capacities I have outside of that, I can be creative and I can make art. So instead of going to school in New York, I, took, the college offer that I had at the time and, made a deal that like, I'm going to go to school in Chicago. I'm going to get this business degree. And I'm going to move to New York immediately after so I can like pursue this like quote unquote creative life. And at the time I was really afraid to say like, I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to make art. And so I said, creative life, maybe I'm working for a museum, maybe I'm working for a creative agency, but I know that I want to work with artists. I want my life to be surrounded by art. I want to wake up and be thinking about what does it mean to create, and like furthermore, what does it mean to like tell my story, or to like tell my family story, or to help people tell their own story. So after school, I graduated, I moved to New York. I started working in the early stage tech startup space. So working for venture-backed companies that were usually like pre-Series C, on operations and business development. But in my nights and weekends, I was making art. And so yeah, that's really my story in terms of just like everything leading up to Solar Market. And what brought me to Solar Market was that the only way that I could still pursue art while living in New York City was by using used materials, gears, equipment, tools, really you name it, to
Mm,
afford to make art. A Solar Market, it's a marketplace for artists to buy, sell, and trade art materials, gear, equipment, tools, you name it. Solar Market's goal is to make art more accessible, sustainable, and equitable.
mhm,
It comes from my personal experience, but it also comes from the fact that art makes up such a huge part of like the American economy, and that on top of just like my career in the tech world and the startup world, having worked for HipCamp, which is a company that was focused on environmental stewardship through creating a platform that was the Airbnb of the outdoors. So making it possible for private landowners to protect their land, by extending it for the public to camp on. So that brought me into environmental stewardship in like a professional capacity, and art, and just the way I was raised to be grateful and thoughtful of my resources brought me closer to what I'm doing now with Solar Market.
mm. That's really interesting because I feel like you have so many different things going on, but it all makes sense in a cohesive sense of like how you were brought up. You had parents who are really passionate about their careers, and you're an entrepreneur yourself, but then also you have just kind of creative instincts and you're able to pursue that with Solar Market.
Yeah, yeah, and like I think, it always starts from like home, like growing up,
Yeah.
my mom was a nurse, and she also started an interior design business and a sewing studio. So that's a very important part that I left out. So even though I never went to art school, I did have an art teacher, or teachers. It was my mother, it was my grandmother, it was my aunt. It was really important for them to teach me how to survive.
Mhm.
And that looked like teaching me how to sew, teaching me how to make, but
Mm,
furthermore, like teaching me how to build. Like I remember one summer, like we needed to fix our back deck and we hired someone and they abandoned the job,
mm,
and my mom finished our deck. She finished repairing and, making sure our deck was
yeah.
usable. And so like
She's
I
a
witnessed.
maker, she's a doer.
Yeah, she's a maker, and I think a lot of people, they give people, I think a lot of times, like within the art world, the idea of like crafts, like
Yeah.
crafting can often be like minimized, but I don't think people realize that like if you have the ability to craft, you have the ability to like extend that skill set out exponentially.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so that was just like how I was raised. I was raised really with a mindset, that I will never need for anything because I have all of the capacity to, solve and repair and address, things that are not necessarily, working around me. Like it gave my parents raised me with that confidence and that esteem. And so
Mm,
that's why it's been like, really just like natural for me to go into the tech startup world,
yeah.
um, and be working in like a operations and like business development capacity,
Mm.
because I was just raised with a lot of like fortitude.
Mm. And is your tech startup background and then also your foray into taking environmental justice as a career through Hip Tech Camp, is that what led you then to be plan?
Well, I have always worked in like the social impact, tech startup capacity, and also in like the consumer tech space. So when I started my career, I started in the African startup space, working for Indela, which is a professional services company that connects African software engineers to companies across the global north mainly, but really the world. And they've also expanded outside of just like the African continent. But at that time they were like, they were when I joined them, they were actually Series D, so they were pretty more they were mature. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on their partnerships team, so working with tech companies to understand like their software and like engineering needs, and also understand the fact that, at the end of the day, people around the world are looking for opportunity. And furthermore, a lot of amazing talent is across the African continent, and are already building solutions that in a lot of ways are like surpassing some of the solutions that are being built here in the West and in the global
Mm-hmm.
North, simply because the culture of living and the way of living on the African continent, people have to be very resilient. And that just extends into business and it extends into technology in that market as well. So that was like sort of like first like social impact focused company I worked at, in that capacity where I really felt like it was super aligned to me. And that kind of just became my story as I worked at, then after in Delhi, I worked at Hip Camp and was there for almost 2 years managing their Eastern North American business, working with landowners to help them, really protect not only their ownership to their land that
Mm-hmm.
might have been in their family for generations, or maybe they are like a Black or Latinx or Indigenous landowner who's returning to the land, helping them see the ways in which they can creatively leverage their land to not only keep it in their family's name or in their name, but furthermore to invite the public to enjoy the outdoors and reconnect with the outdoors. And furthermore, see the outdoors as like a potent solution for really like ambiguous, crazy times, even back then, which was like 2018, 2019. And so, yeah, that's always kind of been where my heart is at. And now I'm working at B Lab US in Canada. They created the B Corporation certification and also are the ones who facilitate its like administration. And there I'm effectively like the internal entrepreneur. I'm special projects manager, so I work on ad hoc projects across the business and really carry and lead and advise on projects that need to get done. It's been really cool to be able to work at B Lab and also continue my journey as an entrepreneur, especially because I've chosen to be bootstrapped, to start really slow and really understand like what I'm solving, how I want to address it, and furthermore, like the ecosystem that like I am joining, and furthermore like building around my business. So yeah, and there's more to say about also just like being like a woman of color and the importance of like, creating ideas, building products, creating new technologies, or creating new solutions, and making sure you protect your ownership and take your time with that. Not to say that like seeking out, institutional investment is bad. No, more people of color, more Black people, especially, women, gender expansive people deserve capital. But I also think
Mm-hmm.
there's something to say about like taking your time towards capital and working with the right people, for
Mm-hmm.
long-term success for yourself, for your business, but also just like the ability to, yeah, own what you make and, be really sort of like at the front of that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally relate to that because, Esther and I, since founding the podcast, we realized uh, we live firsthand like what it's like to found something that you really care about. And we're also potentially pursuing founding our own venture. And so these topics are so near to us, and there's so much to dig into there. But I know that obviously MISO is next weekend, and so I want to dig into that and share with folks
Yeah.
more about MISO as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the founding story of MISO and its mission?
MISO is something that, of course, is like born out of my work at Solar Market. So with MISO, I really wanted to create a weekend that, kind of honed in on the sustainability part, but also had consideration for, what I just shared of like, how do we help people tell their stories, and how do we help the communities and the people who are often like most overlooked, in the art space, in business, in tech, and also especially in like the environmental justice space, be able to not only tell their stories, but advocate on the behalf of their communities and advocate on the behalf of the communities that are most impacted by climate change, or which are Black, Latinx, Indigenous people, people of color, racialized people, women, children, migrants, queer people, people living with disability. How do we ensure these folks who are most deeply impacted by climate change at scale are able to advocate on their behalf, to tell their stories, to find solutions, but also to have reprieve, to also have a break, to also have an opportunity for play, an
Mm,
opportunity for creativity, an opportunity to connect. I wanted to create like a really well-rounded experience, to have these conversations and like have a container for these conversations, but also give people something to walk away with so that they can go back into their communities and advocate for
yeah.
themselves, advocate for others. And that's why I created myself. And as a part of like, Brooklyn Global Shapers, we're under the World Economic Forum. Our goal, and furthermore, our work is around collective action on the local level. So, living here in New York, I've been here for 7 years. I feel like a very deep responsibility to honor this community, and to reflect the leaders, within climate change across the intersections of business, tech, art, and culture, and also like wellness. I want to give them the opportunity to be able to show that environmental justice is justice for racialized people. It is justice for women and children. It is justice for queer people, for migrants, for people with disabilities. It's really a meta movement where environmental justice allows for us to finally pursue an intersectionality where everybody gets free. So that's really like the heart of MISO. I know it kind of like covers the gamut, but yeah, that's kind of me. Like I really try to like leave no stone unturned. And if I couldn't turn it, like know that I tried. And so
Yeah, it sounds like you're covering, whole aspect, whole world basically, for climate justice. I'm wondering, like, do you have any suggestions on maybe concrete steps that maybe everyday, professionals or young people can take to tackle the exact problem that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think about this so much. Like a big thing that I've thought about while creating my show, especially because, it's been created in mind of the Shaper community, which is made up of like really amazing young people and is supported by like, generations of Shapers as well. Is how do we make climate change and environmental justice not only like a common point of conversation in our daily
Mhm,
lives? How are we supporting people to just like even begin to think about it.
mhm,
But how are we also helping people see the small, tangible ways that they can create change? And that's why it's called MISO. MISO is a play on mycelial networks, which are the networks that, fungi and growths, root systems make, in order to reach far and wide, to be able to like replicate themselves in many places. And I think about how powerful that it is, that these systems are actually just made out of like really tiny threads of like, plant matter.
yeah,
And that is really what it means to be in a movement. It's not about, always like sweeping change. Sweeping change is amazing. And that's what we should always strive for, is to like, overturn it and to like, take out the old, bring in the new.
yeah,
But imagine the power of just like the small actions that we take in our daily lives. And imagine the power of, being able to have that conversation with someone new you met, or with your family, or with your friends. So I think in conclusion, like, I think it really begins with just like a mindset change
yeah,
and being able to like be curious and ask yourself like really thoughtful questions about your daily life and how you interact with your environment, how you interact with the communities around you, and what does that mean for a movement that feels so much bigger than us? You know,
yeah,
like climate change isn't something that just suddenly happened. It's been
Yeah.
happening for hundreds of years. And the big reason why I want to focus on the communities that are most impacted by climate change is that they honestly have the solutions. They have been surviving and subverting climate change. So I also would say people need to listen to those who often go most unheard,
Mhm.
because the ways in which they've been navigating injustice, the ways in which they have been navigating um, an environment that's rapidly changing, whether that's gentrification, whether that's environmental degradation,
Mhm.
whether that's living in a food desert, whether that's not having clean air around you or clean water around you, is can surpass any sort of like, VC backed technology at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people won't, I think even me saying that, people be like, no way, like this girl's crazy. And like the thing is like you until you've seen it and until you've witnessed it, the systems that people can build simply out of survival, will you really know what it means to create like a powerful technology?
No, I love this broader sentiment that you have that, climate change, even to just fathom it, even to just like close our eyes and just imagine the whole world and the whole atmosphere, like it's such a big problem, but that each of us, by just taking small steps and initiating conversations, can start chipping away at the problem. And I think even just having MISO and us having this conversation, it's inspired that. It's inspired people reaching out to the organizations that they work at to be like, hey, like, can you be a sponsor and can you
Yeah,
put forth not just money but also a commitment, right, to this cause?
yeah,
So it's really it's starting small but really having a major impact through that.
absolutely. Like, MISO is something that I dreamed up like, 3 months ago now. Like, so all this has come together pretty quickly. And it's been like a beautiful, amazing experience, and also like a challenging one, like one where I had to like really like buckle down, or yeah, buckle down and say like, what do I really stand for? Like, what
What's
do I
the
want this
core things that I
to
can get out
be?
of this 3 days?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, um, with that being said, like being the conversations I've had with like, organizations and communities have has been less about like, oh, there's an event and it's going to be fun and there's going to be so much to
Yeah.
do and so much to offer, but having like genuine conversations about what does it mean for wherever we stand in this life, whatever our work is, what does it mean to be committed to not
Mhm.
only change but also the ability to honor our past and honor the fact that we all come from communities that have survived. We all
Mhm.
come from communities that have overcome and like have given us the ability to be standing here today. And so as we look towards the future, how do we honor that past? And I think, that being like the resounding conversation I've had has just like meant so much to me, because I think that's how you really overcome climate doom. Is
Mhm.
like, sure, the anxieties of right now are like overwhelming, but like we've done this and we've done it well, because like me and you are here and we're able to be, on this like telepodcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel so much inspiration just listening to you
Yeah, I
talk.
feel like I'm so connected to the past and the
I
future
know,
at the
yeah.
same time. Just through your
Yes.
speech, it's incredible.
Oh wow, thank you guys. Like and I wouldn't be here without, the women who raised me. If they couldn't refer back to the, experiences, the lives that they've lived, the lessons that they were taught by the woman that raised them, who raised them, who raised them. Like, and that's really what it means to be like leading with ancestral power,
Yeah,
and like what it means to like honor our ancestors, is to be
Yeah.
able to take, the things that the women, the people who raised you, and take it to a new level, and take it to a level where you could incorporate, modernity and everything
Mhm.
that is new, bright and shiny, and
Yeah.
remind yourself that like, there was a time where things were much simpler, but the problems were still complex. And so,
Mhm.
and how
yeah,
did they navigate that? You know, it wasn't by sticking their head in the sand. It was like, I have a mission, I have a job, and that is this here survival. And
Yeah.
also one that calls in for a quality of life, for rest, for like play. Not everything is only comes down to like what is like difficult and hard and like
Mhm.
painful. Like there's even, and I'm West African, so the way in which we grieve is through celebrating this person's life
Mhm.
and their contributions and like the love that they extended. And also, just like learning and being in reflection. So yeah, I think that is also kind of like my mindset around like the climate change movement and the conversations and how to like foster those conversations.
Yeah, I love that you're like learning through the pain, but you're also celebrating at the same time. So I'm kind of curious, what are some lessons you've learned over the years in impact?
Being in the social impact space and doing it at the intersection of business, um, it's so important to just like have really strong values and a very
Mhm.
strong moral compass, because I think having worked in the social impact space for the last 7 years, it's become increasingly trendy. People
Mhm.
want to feel good when they do their job. They want to feel like they're having an impact. And so I think it has become increasingly trendy and has become increasingly like an attractive space to work in. And I think sometimes like, it can, but at the same time, like you're making money. There's lots of opportunity to like seek out like
Yeah.
lucrative, like well-paid work in the space.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just like have like, a strong moral compass. I think it's also really important to be like be someone who can understand that there's impact and that there's business even in the social impact business space you know and I think it's about being able to have like a really strong community who can give you feedback. I think it's really important to have an open mind and an open heart, but again, I think having like boundaries and understanding like where the impact starts and where the business starts, and like
Mm.
also that there is a way for those to like run parallel.
Mhm.
And I think I'm especially learning that working with B Lab and at B Lab US and Canada and working with B Corps. What does it mean to be a business that's committed to climate justice? What does it mean to be a business committed to racial equity? What does
Mhm.
it mean to be a business that is going to place the interests of the public, their workers, every human life, and the environment over that of a small minority of shareholders who honestly only care about the profit. They only care about the path to profit, even if that
Mhm.
means, lives are, impacted, irrevocably or
Yeah.
negatively, or if, you ruin the environment.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that being in the social impact space has just really taught me to be the most confident person I can be and
Yeah.
be a person of my word. And to also learn from my mistakes. And so I think that's also a big lesson is that you're gonna fuck up. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna make mistakes. Like you're gonna like misunderstand.
Mhm.
Um, you're
Yeah.
going to, not necessarily like the intent isn't sometimes not always the impact. So
Mhm.
being able to like humble yourself and take a step back and
Yeah.
like own up to sort of like the ways in which we as humans are not flawless. So I
Mhm.
think being in the social impact space has also taught me a lot about grace and what it means to have grace for myself and what it means to have grace for other people.
On that topic, like we talk a lot about mental health and just
Mhm.
self-care on this podcast because that's how kind of our podcast originated, which is Esther and I talking to each other about how do we even maintain our sanity when sometimes you're working in these fast-paced careers and you just don't have time for yourself, right? And so I'm curious, like, what are your like, I guess, personal rituals or what are your go-to things that you do when you
Yeah.
when you're in that place where you're so busy? And I know you're so busy because just from our meetings, like you're talking to so many people every day,
Yeah.
you're getting all the resources, and you're really kicking butt. But how do you maintain like space and kind of like your own like sense of like grounding while you're managing all of this people and work?
I think most importantly, it is, it starts with like my relationships, like maintaining like healthy
Yeah.
relationships with like my friends and family. Being able to like have a community around me that isn't just like work and it isn't
Mm-hmm.
just like my business. And, I also go to like a great extent to like, you know, make sure there's like relationships of mine that doesn't necessarily require anything than us just like showing up um,
Mm-hmm.
and like being present for each other. Um, I think that's also really important in terms of just like friendships. I think in a city like New York City, especially as you know, like everybody's a go-getter. Everybody has like, a purpose, a passion.
Yeah.
You can kind of get caught up in that. So I think my friends and family are like a part of my rituals, being able to, yeah, you know, being able to like go somewhere and like feel love,
Yeah.
not because of just like my output. Um,
Mm-hmm.
especially like living in capitalism
Yeah.
and living in a city like New York where, yeah, it demands a lot out of you. So like having those spaces where I can just show up no matter how tired or how tired they are, no
Yeah.
matter how, sad or anxious or angry, like, and I think that's especially true as a Black woman. I think I'm often people who know me know that like I am like a very sensitive soul and like I have like a lot of like well like I'm just someone who like is just like easily moved, but I think in society I'm often like casted as like angry or like aggressive, and so because of that, I always like hold my feelings back a lot,
Mm-hmm.
even if they are read as otherwise. So having those spaces are a part of my rituals, and that's, checking in with folks daily or weekly or however often I can. Going for walks is really important for me. Like I try to make sure, I think especially after the pandemic and like lockdown, I now like try to make sure that like I get my steps in every day.
Yeah.
Make sure to like, go for a walk around my neighborhood. Of course, making art. I think art has not only been like a place for me to like take a break and like process like emotions and like difficult days,
Mm-hmm.
hard days, but honestly in a way has kind of become a lot like church, or have kind of been like this temple of how like I connect to something that feels bigger to me because of the like
Yeah.
stories that I'm able to tell and the way that I'm able to express myself and the people that I get to work with and like the stories that we share when we're collaborating, when we're working together, and how we like channel that into our creative work, into our creative expression. All of that like allows me to like kind of be in like a meditative state.
Yeah.
um Even though it feels like work, it doesn't, because like I am able to like kind of just like get out the gunk that is like this life. And
Yeah.
I think like lastly, it's just, rituals for myself is also just like my home and like my space, like having somewhere to come to. Like I've been living in my apartment now for 6 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, which is like so rare in New York City,
That
right?
is really rare. Yeah.
But like, when I, moved into this apartment, I was like, you know, I guess 23 at the time. And I was like, man, my 20s have already been like so tumultuous. Like, I really just like need a home. I had moved to New York City from Chicago. I didn't really have that many friends. And so like the first couple years in New York is always the hardest because you don't, especially if you move here and you didn't go to school here, you don't have like a huge network here. Because I knew I was like starting over and it was also my 20s, I was just like, I need somewhere to like ground me. So like my home is also just kind of like a place where like I express myself, I process my emotions, I welcome in my community. Like these walls have like, they feel like a part of me. And so I would say
Yeah.
also just like tending to my home, tending to my
Yeah.
house, thinking of creative ways to like make my home special for me. And like my home has also been like an extension of my art practice and an
Mhm.
art practice that is rooted in sustainability. So that's always been like very fun to like use like my home as a palette.
As we wrap up the podcast, there's one question that we ask all of our guests. The name of the podcast is Move with Power, and we named it for our personal reasons, but we're curious, what would you say Move with Power means to you as it comes to you?
Wow, move with power. What does move with power mean to me? I mean, move with power, I think immediately I think about, someone like, some of the folks in my family. Like I think about like my brother Ayo, I think about my mom. I think about, my grandmothers and my grandparents. I just think about like the way I was raised, in a
Mhm.
way that was like very like collective, but but also that was like really supportive of like me, coming into my own. And I think there's a lot of people who raised me who, helped me to become myself. So when I think of power, I think of like my community and my family and the people who raised me, who helped me get this far. To, my mom growing up would always say like, just be Kemi. I immediately, stuck out from my environment or to my friends around me because like I look West African, like, I did not look like quote unquote American. And I have a different I have a non like Anglican name, and so I
Mhm.
like really struggled with just like feeling like confident. And so like, moving with power is really about like you know, me not only being me, but being a reflection of all the folks who helped me get this far. So that's what moving with power is. It's also bringing my community along with me, but also showing up wholly as myself. Because when I show up wholly as myself, I show up for them, and I show up for
Mhm.
what they represent and what
Wow,
they believe.
that's so
So
I have goosebumps.
oh, I'm in tears.
Wow. I listening to you talk is like such a treat. It's so calming
Yeah.
and grounding.
Oh, thank you guys. I really appreciate that. That's super sweet. Yeah, like I really appreciate you guys inviting me to do this interview. Um,
Yeah.
I always just like being able to, yeah, connect my story to other people's stories, and I feel really excited about Move with Power and how you guys are showcasing what it means to be really be a person of intention and a person who is going about this life differently, but in a way that allows for us to like really change what power means and what does
Mm,
it mean to like be empowered. And it's not
mm,
how we were like raised to think about it, especially like in an American context.
yeah.
So yeah, thank you just for inviting me here and having me and letting me tell my story.
We look forward to seeing you in person next
Yeah. See
weekend.
you soon.
Yes, MISO.
We're so excited.
It's gonna be at Brooklyn Commons, April
Yeah.
19th through the 21st. There's something for everyone. So yeah, I'm excited to be sharing this with y'all and your community as well.
Thank you for tuning in another episode of the Move with Power podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, check out our Patreon, and join our growing base of Power Move members via our website in the description box. Until next time, remember to move with power.